hello, and welcome. Welcome to the very first of our 5-part series where we're diving more deeply into the module that the Journey You Own created on contemplative practices, productivity, and well-being. Today, we're going to be talking about creating space. So I have divided out each of these deep dive sessions into a segment that corresponds to a segment in the module. You don't have to have completed the module or even looked at it to join us for these sessions. These sessions are completely independent of anything else, meaning that you can see it separately and you don't need to have taken part in it. October 4th is the next session. It's going to be on contemplative practices. And what we're going to do is look at scientific research that speaks to some of the mindfulness techniques, meditation techniques, and productivity and contemplative practices that we have looked at in the module. We're also going to look at some of the barriers to starting a practice and maintaining that practice, whether that be in meditation itself or in other forms of mindfulness. On November 1st, we're going to be talking about our personal missions, values, and how those align potentially or maybe don't align with those of our organizations, those of others who we work with, or those in our lives. And what we do when we have that sense of conflict within us related to that values alignment. December 6th is a fun one. That's productivity. And I am, in my daily work life, I'm usually working on productivity and efficiencies in animal shelters. And so this one will be looking at productivity and efficiencies in our own lives. And what does healthy productivity look like? Really defining some of the tools that are there and what we can do related to those tools. And then January is my favorite topic, which is why we end with it. And that's communication and action. It's a huge topic. It could be its own module. And so we will be diving as deeply as possible in a module that, in a section that will look at the use of our language, how we think about language in our conversations, and then the learning and unlearning process. So that's what's coming towards us in the next few months. But today we're going to be talking about creating space. So let's really think about how we're going to be outlining it. I'm going to first define a framework for noticing it. And then I'm also going to give us activities for each of the 3 different sections of the framework. If there is anything that you have that you want me to address during this conversation, just come off mute because my chat is closed for me to be able to actually look at my slides. So feel free to interrupt. This is meant to be somewhat casual and fun. So I'm going to start us off with a story. This is a shelter that I've worked with. It's the floor plan for the shelter. Now, this story is fictional. It's fictional, but parts of the story may reflect some reality, and other parts of it will be completely fantasized, as you'll see. So in this particular shelter, we have runs that are where you can hopefully see my arrows that are up here, and there's dog runs all around different parts of this shelter. So I am across these areas in these different dog runs, and I'm visiting the shelter in July. It's a hot summer day. There's a lot of animals in the shelter, right? Because it's the peak of kitten season. All kinds of cats and dogs are there. On this particular day, all of these runs are full. And then I hear that there's 40 more dogs coming in because of a case. So what we start doing is closing the transfer doors to put dogs on either side, right? And then in these larger runs, we put multiple dogs in there. And still there isn't enough room for these dogs. So what we start doing is putting kennels all along the hallways. I'm telling you again, this actually hasn't happened at this particular facility, but I have a feeling that some of you can relate to this, that perhaps you've seen it in your own facilities or in other locations where every single part of the facility is full, where you're running around the hallways looking for space. So I was one of those people running down the hallways, and I finally got to this part of the hallway. And when I was at that part of the hallway, what I saw was right here where I'm drawing was a beautiful door. It was a door with this golden handle, and there was light streaming through. And I looked under my keychain. I had this tiny little keychain, and there was a gold key that I had there. So I go ahead and I put that lock into this door. And it's a door that looks like this. And I'd been at the shelter so many times, and I'd never, ever noticed this door. It was really the first time I was ever seeing it. So I went ahead, put that key in, and opened the door. And what I saw was when I was right at this spot. Okay, so one of the fun things about today is I get to draw for you. So what I saw when I walked out there was all these smiling faces looking at me. And it was people that were all lined up, ready. Ooh, it's not that easy to draw. My apologies. You can see I'm not the best at drawing, but all these people lined up, ready to take my animals, ready to take some of the animals that are within here with smiling faces. And that all this time, we had been within the confines of this box, right? This shelter. We had been looking for space within this facility, within the confines of this facility itself. And that it was only when we went to that golden, amazing door that we saw that the possibilities were limitless, that there was this expanse that was outside of where we are. And that, and all of this, is representative of how we can sometimes view our own lives as having a set amount of space, right? And that this is a space that looks like a box. And everything that we have fits into the confines or the structure of this box, whether it be our studies, our health, our work, our family, our friends. All of that is there. And yet we can look outside of that or within it to be able to notice that space is there as well. So that animal shelter that was looking at space within the confines of the structure had to look simply outside of it. And for us, we can look both outside and within to find that space that we have. In the module, we structured space in these three different ways. We described it as physical space, so that's my physical entity that's right here, my room, my surroundings. It could be the space, again, that we have to be able to physically do things. We have an energetic space that appears when we enter any place. So when I come into a lecture, if there are people who are smiling at me and who are warm and friendly, I can feel that positive energy. And if instead I walk into a room and everybody turns the other way, well, that's a different energy. And then there's the mental and emotional space. All our thoughts and emotions that are riding on whatever it is that we're thinking about, whether the past or the future. We talked about these three different ways of viewing it. For the purposes of today, I want to reframe this to notice how our lives open up to space by viewing space in three other ways. Space as a possibility, space as a commitment, and space as a contemplation. We're still going to see how physical, mental, emotional, and energetic space plays a role. But now I want us to think about it in a broader, more holistic sense. So let's begin with space as a possibility. In that shelter story that I was describing, there's space within the structure, but the minute we opened the doors, we saw that there was opportunity for community to engage in a new way. Possibility opened up with that space. And it's as we are in our lives, having all these different areas, that space shows up within those fields, within the areas of this construct. But we can also see it from the outside when we view it as a possibility. And the way that we can do that is by creating an intention. If you looked or did the module, you probably did the section on productivity, which actually defined what an intention is or how it shows up. I'll review that today as well, because an intention is a way of viewing our lives. It's how we show up to any given space. When we create this framework of an intention, it gives us the opportunity to rethink and reframe all these other parts of our lives. And that opens us up to possibility and opens us up to space. So how do we frame an intention? What does that mean? We hear the word a lot and different groups think about it in different ways. So this is the way that my team thinks about it at The Journey You Own. When we think about an intention, we think about how it is we're showing up. How do we want to be in any space, whatever activity we have? In the beginning of the week, on Mondays, we meet as a team and we come up with our intention for the week. How do we want to show up for everything that we're doing? In this particular shelter, in this photo that you see, I was walking through the feline kennel areas and talking to people about how they're housing cats in this area. And my intention was to be open and curious. I really wanted to hear what their concerns were and what their thoughts were with the process. When I'm not open and curious, the way that it shows up is that I begin to feel tight in my body. Maybe my hands start clenching. I might get a furrow on my brow. I might start interrupting people while they're talking because now I'm no longer being open and curious. And so it's when we're not in our intention that we can notice that we're stepping outside of it and then come back to it. Creating newly, being present, and being grounded are other examples of how we can have intentions that have us be present to both our bodies, our mind, our energetic, emotional, and physical space. And when we do that, it opens us up for possibility. So I'm going to give, as I mentioned, a few activities that I'd like you to try out over the course of the next few weeks before the next session. If you're watching this recorded, I encourage you to try this out on your own when you have time. And then you can share it on the Maddie's Pet Forum or share it via email with us. Keep it down and jot it down for yourself. So consider setting an intention for how you want to show up in the world at the beginning of the week for the next 4 weeks. And then reflect on it each Friday. What I do is I always have sticky pads, like these little sticky notes. And I write my intention right on it and I put it up right on my computer. Now, I happen to be a person who's working at my computer. You might be listening to this while you're walking, within a shelter or doing other work. So it could look like having that intention and putting that paper in your pocket and having it with you and just having that as a reminder. Keep the phrases and then you can review them. Okay, so this is the first of 3 different ways of thinking about space. Now, what I'm going to do is ask you to pause with me for just a moment, and I'd like us to together, if I can do that. I might not be able to do this effectively when I have my annotations here. I'd like us to pause for about 60 seconds and think about how space, possibility, and intention shows up in your life. So I'm going to time this myself for 60 seconds. Write the words, if you have a notebook next to you, space, possibility, and intention. And let's just pause for a moment. Is there a particular intention that comes to your mind for how you want to be today? Let's go ahead and continue. Our next view of space is as a commitment. This is Katara. She's one of my dogs, and she is modeling a lovely faucet. And the reason she's modeling a lovely faucet is because my faucet has been broken for quite a while in one of my bathrooms. It's actually the hot water portion of it is broken. So you can't really turn it on without trying to lock it in or tie it in place. It's been broken for a while, so all of us just use the cold water. Or we may put it on occasionally and then go ahead and attempt to turn it. It's been this lingering thought in the back of my mind now for a while. This faucet has been broken. And so what I did is I went ahead and finally went ahead and bought a new faucet. And this is a view of a completion, right? I finally got to the place where I'm actually bought the faucet, and now there's a few other steps that have to be taken. Called the plumber. I have an appointment scheduled. This lingering item of this faucet is something that's been in the backdrop. By the way, I just want to mention something. I do not recommend giving faucets as toys to dogs. It can break their teeth. This is simply modeled. I took the faucet away. So for anyone watching and is perhaps also listening to this recorded, this is not something I recommend doing as a toy. This was simply a modeling event. So the main point of this is that our physical, mental, energetic space gets filled up by these incomplete items. And one of these items was that drippy faucet. The fact that I couldn't use hot water for 3 months and instead was always going to the cold water, a part of my mind was still hooked to that. It was connected to that idea that, oh my goodness, there is this faucet that I need to fix. And so that takes up space. That takes up cognitive load. That takes up my mental, energetic space. And it breaks a commitment that I have to being whole and complete in my life. Examples of lingering items can show up anywhere in our lives. And I'm going to put them into this chart in different ways, but these actually represent many different ideas. There can be broken or missing items that like that faucet, or not having what it is you actually need to get a task done. For example, you want to do an orthopedic surgery, but you don't actually have the tools that you need to be able to do that. It can show up as mental or emotional space with conversations that you wanted. For example, if in my life, every time I pass a particular ice cream shop, I keep thinking about a friend that I had ice cream with, and I would love to go meet her again, but I haven't actually set that time up. So that's been lingering in my mind. Or it can be an email that you have in a draft form where you wanted to spend a lot of time to really be intentional about how you wrote that email, but it's still in that draft form and you haven't actually sent it, or a phone call or some form of communication. And then also energetic space, like the meetings in our life that we need to do to take care of ourselves. So a dentist appointment, a doctor's appointment, other things like that. Those are all lingering items that are in the back of our minds that take up space, that impact the way that we view ourselves as being a commitment. I do not expect you to read this slide. What this slide represents is Lisa, who's on my team, she put tasks and completions into ChatGPT and asked for a series of statements that would explain what would happen if you had incomplete items in your life. And this is what the AI bot came up with. And what you can see is that there's a long list of things that impact, according to, again, an AI bot, that impact how you can function and what completion looks like when you don't function. This is more for the purposes of those of us who are going to look at the slides later. Our incompletes occupy that space in our minds, right? That's meant for wholeness. And so when we can reflect and confront what's incomplete in our lives, then we can remove some of that load that's in our brains, that's in our minds. So what does completion look like? Well, sometimes it looks like you're actually finished with something, but sometimes you can be complete without finishing it. So an example is you've finished a particular project, but in your mind, you're still thinking about it. You're concerned about something related to it. And even though you've submitted the project, you are not complete with that because it's still lingering. Or another example is like my faucet example, where now I'm complete with it. I bought the faucet. I made the appointment for the plumber. So I can take that out of my mind. It's not finished, but it's not weighing on me mentally. In this photo, there's this dog that's going through this agility track, and I can imagine itself saying, okay, I'm done with this particular side of it, but I still have a few more places to go. So they might be finished with one particular aspect of it, but not complete overall, or vice versa. So think about this later on too. What does it mean to be both finished, and what does it mean to be complete? Complete mentally, emotionally, in your minds. Completion is really a feeling, right? We can feel complete when we put something into existence reliably. And that means that we know that it's going to be addressed somewhere. So now I'm going to take us to some practical tools. What does that mean to be addressed somewhere? Well, one thing is to view our calendar as a place to be able to address time as space, right? That we know that things are reliably captured in time itself. Another one is having a notebook nearby. I always have small notebooks around, and it's a place where you can jot down ideas or thoughts or anything that you have. It can be on your smartphone. It can be anywhere. The key, though, is that you need to have time set up at the end of the day or the end of the week to capture all those ideas. Otherwise, you just have a whole bunch of notebooks with ideas everywhere, and that's not really helpful. So somehow your capture tool not only has to capture those tools, but then you have to be able to reflect and place those into action somewhere. I use voice notes with transcription a lot. I have an Apple Watch that I use where I just hit record on a voice memo. And that's a nice, fast way if I'm on a walk or anywhere else that I can just take a quick note if there's something that I want to be able to reflect upon. And then again, at the end of the day or the end of the week, I come back to reflect upon that. And then a lot of people like lists. I myself do not use lists that much, but if you do, I would highly encourage you to connect it to a calendar, because when you put a when you put a date involved with any of these things, it'll remove your concern, because now you know that it's somewhere in existence in this framework. So let's spend a little bit more time talking about calendars, because I think that this is an area that we can get a little nitty gritty into the how we utilize calendars. No, it's a reflection of how we view time. Not everybody here has the luxury of being able to create their own schedules, right? Of being able to really map out what their calendar looks like. You can, however, reframe some of the ideas on that calendar or what it is you see. And then for those of us who can create our calendars, let's think about what we put on it. And when we're filling that, are we filling it in the beginning of the year and blocking out time for those events that really mean a lot to us? So I am going to share my screen in a new way for a minute and just take us into a practical example, because I get asked this a lot about how do we think about our time and what does that look like? So what you see here in purple are some meetings. Notice I put this out for next year so that it wouldn't impact my calendar right now. So these 3 meetings are how a typical calendar might look, right? That you have a team meeting at 8 a.m., maybe you have a project to work on at 9:45, and lunch. What I do and what I like doing is changing the way that we think about our meetings. So rather than having it called a team meeting, let's give it a fun name that actually makes it interesting. And this particular fun name, I put in I use ChatGPT to say, okay, I have a team meeting. I want to have it reframed in a way that's fun and that'll be a lot more interesting than team meeting. So it came up with Project Palooza, unleashing updates and weekly wonders. And when I go into that, what I want to do is actually have everything I need for that meeting right here. Now, I happen to be using Google Calendar. This can happen with any calendar program that you use. Even a paper calendar you can attach and keep the necessary materials right there. In my case, what I do is I create meeting notes right inside of it. I make sure that I'm inviting the right people, the people from my team that I want to be there. I will put it and tag it so that it's specific to a particular project that I'm doing so that I know that it's captured in a way that really has everything I need. I might attach something from my drive. I might put a link there. I'm putting everything I need right there. The other thing I'm doing is that I am going to go back and take a look and see if I can make these hour meetings 50 minutes instead of an hour. And the reason I do that is because I want a pause. I want some space between my meetings. If I have control of my calendar, I can do this. If I don't, then what I can do is try to create that pause in between with just a 30-second breath and pause. The other thing that I do if I'm creating my meetings is I put in another block that I call reflection, and I will save that in so that I am blocked. And actually what I'll do is I'll put it in a way that has it show up in a different way so that later I can see that as personal time. And I know it's something that I'm doing for myself in an effective way. Same thing happens for my own projects. I block out time for my own projects where I will put do not disturbs into the calendar, which is what that little headphones is. And then I'll put blocks. And then similarly with things like lunch dates, I'll make sure that I have all the locations, the invitations, and everything just put in a way that I can actually get there. So let's go back to what I was showing you and say, what was it that I was prioritizing there? On that particular calendar, because it's in the future, I was prioritizing my own time. But sometimes we look at it and we can see over the course of a week or a few weeks or months, you can see where your time is going when you log it the way that I just showed you. And you can also always remove items from calendars, which is why I look at my calendar once a month, the beginning of the month, and also at the beginning of the week, because sometimes we get so hung up in all these appointments and meetings that we end up double booking and triple booking ourselves. So what does it look like to view time as space, as a commitment, right? We put it all together and we see, are we prepared for these commitments? Are we releasing ourselves of the anxiety of these meetings by having ourselves there, giving ourselves the preparation time, all the documents, all the tasks, knowing we have the right people and that space for creativity and space for reflection? What about when other people factor into our completion? Now, this is something that I get asked a lot of questions about. Sometimes we have to wait for other people, right, to complete a project, or other people have to be involved with the plumber. He needs to come here and help me put my faucet back in because I don't know how to. So we can do that. We can have other people be part of the completion. Really, what we need to do is let go of our concern and understand where our concern comes from, because that's what's taking up our mental, emotional, and energetic bandwidth. It's that concern. So is our concern tied to the task being done? Maybe we feel that it's not going to be done effectively. Or is it tied to our own sense of responsibility with this completion? And is it because we're equating our self-worth with completion? That's something that we need to let go of. What about placing that concern into existence? Does that take away our concern? Because now we have the steps in motion, right? And that's actually a critical component of using something like a calendar, knowing that it is reliably placed somewhere where you know it's going to be addressed. That allows us to let go of some of that concern. Now, the attachment to completion is a whole nother thing because that is within our own minds. It's shifting our framework of who we are, who are we being from what we do, right? Because a lot of this is related to what we're doing, which is in the future, to bringing us back to the present moment. It's creating that gap where we shift from this thinking of everything in the future to what we need to do right now. So now let's do the same thing that we did before. Our next activity that I'd like you to think about is some of the lingering items that are in your life. And by the time we meet again in a month, or perhaps if you're again listening to this on your own, you can post this on the forum, commit to completing 2 or 3 items before our next session. And notice that I put completion in quotes. And the reason I did that is because completing, again, can mean many different things. It's removing that concern related to this item. So let's again spend about 60 seconds right now in silence, writing down just 1 or 2 items in your mind that you feel incomplete about. And then think about how completion relates to your commitment and how it opens up space. Now moving to the last of the ways that I want to think about space, and that's space as a contemplation itself. The reason we pause is because a pause shows us the gap between events and the moment before action. It gives us an opportunity to reset and notice and ground ourselves in the current moment. So I placed a pause, as you saw in this entire section, 2 separate times so that our minds could reset for just a brief moment. We can do this in our lives by simply taking a breath before we start speaking, before we have an action, before we're moving on to something else. It's the first step in noticing our bodies and bringing ourselves to the present moment. In a study that was written in 2010 in Science magazine called "A Wandering Mind is an Unhappy Mind," there were over 2,000 adults who were asked a question related to happiness. How are you feeling right now? And then they were asked, what are you doing right now? This is pretty interesting. This particular study had 27, it had a whole series of different activities that individuals could be doing. And they were asked to select those. And then they were asked, are you thinking about something other than what you're currently doing? Right? So what this study did was it demonstrated, and the results of the study really demonstrated, that people have a wandering mind. It's really common. We know that. Our minds wander all the time. In this study, almost 50% of the time was spent in wandering. What was interesting is that people were less happy when their minds were wandering, even when they were thinking about positive things. Because people actually thought more about positive thoughts when their minds were wandering, and yet they were unhappy about it. So the mind wandering was the cause and not the consequence of the unhappiness. Just sort of fascinating to think about. That when we ground ourselves in the present moment, can we ground ourselves in a state of more happiness than when our minds are wandering? So that's the first study. Then later on, that was in 2010, there are many other studies that were done around spaciousness of the body and mind. There's also some that's done about studies that have been done on cognitive load theory, which says that our minds have a certain amount of mental capacity, right, or emotional capacity, some sort of a bandwidth for being able to take things in and then act upon it. Now, I'm not an expert in this area. This is an educational area, and I know there's others in this room that are going to be experts. But what I found to be really interesting about this particular study is that the researchers in this study took medical students and gave them a simulation. It's an emergency situation, a video simulation that they had to go through. That was a very high intensity video simulation, seeing if they could actually navigate this situation in a really positive way. Some of the students, half the students, were allowed to take pauses, a pause of a minute, a few minutes. So 1 minute, 2 minutes, 4 minutes, and so on. The other half were told that they had to do the simulation right from the beginning to the end without any pauses or breaks beyond, clicking the screen. And what they found is that both cognitive load, meaning the feeling that you have all this information, so the amount that you're able to put in, and performance were higher in the conditions with pauses than in the ones without it. And again, there's many different studies in cognitive load theory that show that putting positive pauses is really good and positive for cognitive load. But this was one of the first studies to show that not only was it positive about cognitive load, it was also really enhanced performance. And the reason I'm mentioning these is because I think it's important for us to view this space and these pauses as being an opportunity, as an opportunity for us to open ourselves to how we can perform, how we can be in the world by balancing our view of both mind and body and the view of that spaciousness of it. That when we take pauses, when we ground ourselves in something other than, our work, when we're grounding ourselves in our present moment by just taking a break from it, that's when we open up to more possibility. So I am going to spend now about 5 minutes, maybe about 10. I should have about 5 to 10 minutes left, taking us through a meditation that we're going to do right now. And it's going to be faster than what I would typically do because I'm going to lay out the groundwork for what practice and spaciousness of the mind and body can look like. Attached to this particular lecture series, there will be 2 different meditations that are, one's about 30 seconds, there's another one that's 3 minutes, and then actually we'll give you a full 20-minute one as well. So this is just to give you a sense of what a practice could look like. I'll probably do it in about 3 minutes. So right now, wherever you are, as long as you're not driving, I ask that you ground yourself, whether you're standing like I am or sitting down. Take a few deep breaths. Inhaling through the nose, exhaling out of the mouth. We take deep breaths so that we can leave our sympathetic system, go into the parasympathetic, ground ourselves in being here and present. Notice where the presence of breath is felt most strongly in your body. This might be in the rise and fall of your shoulders or in your chest. You might notice the breath on your upper lip as it enters and exits your nostrils. Gently close your eyes if they're open and turn your attention to the mind. Noticing any thoughts or emotions that are residing there. Imagine all these thoughts, mental constructs as clouds that are floating in the sky. Visualize yourself lying down on the ground, looking up at the blue sky, noticing the spaciousness of the mind, the expanse of the clouds that are surrounding you, your thoughts as they drift. Turn your attention to that sense of space, expanding it outwards. Now gently bring it back to the body. Imagine yourself inhaling and exhaling from all the pores in your body. Feel yourself as light. Perhaps visualize a balloon, an expanse of the body. Feel the energy of the breath along your skin, anywhere where the air touches your surface. And become present to the body as spaciousness. Now bring these two together. Your mind's spaciousness, seeing the thoughts as clouds, and your body's spaciousness. Releasing your hold or attachment to any fixation that your mind might be on. Now take a few more deep breaths, letting go of the visualization, allowing it to dissipate into the sky, into your surroundings. Now bringing yourself back to this meeting. That is just an example of a very quick body-mind spaciousness practice that you can practice anywhere at any time to notice how you relate to everything surrounding you, to have you in a more expansive view. So your next steps for this section is to practice a spaciousness meditation and see what arises for you. I do recommend doing the longer one as opposed to this really fast example that I gave you. I think it's helpful to have those pauses where you can really settle into the body and really visualize yourself with your thoughts going by. So again, this is for the purposes of sharing with you that it is feasible to do this in a shorter time period as well. I'd like to close this out today by just reminding us again from the module about some of the necessities of space and why we're even talking about this today. That there's a lot that's in our lives that has us in a place where we're often asking for that space and we're looking for it. And that the implications of neglecting ourselves, our own mental and emotional well-being, it really transcends everything. It shows up in all components of our lives. The information on this particular slide you'll have for later, so I don't expect us to read through it. But when we notice space, there are tremendous emotional and mental benefits that then translate into our lives. It shows up in our work. It shows up in our conversations. It makes us feel whole with ourselves, complete with ourselves, and improves our overall well-being. When we recognize that we have some control over how we notice space by reducing our mental connection with the concerns, by being fixated in certain areas, by grounding ourselves in the present moment. And so these next few weeks, you have 3 different activities that I'd like you to consider. Setting that intention for how you want to show up in the world will give you that opportunity to view your day, view your week, view your life within a construct that will automatically give you space, right? Because now you're not going from one thing to the other, just back to back. You are able to visualize it from the outside. And remember that the reflection period at the end is actually really important. Think about those lingering items and look to completing some of those concerns in your mind. It doesn't mean that you have to go out and do absolutely everything to complete everything. You don't have to buy things in order to be complete about them. You might not be able to finish a project, and yet you can still be internally complete about it. So think about how that completion shows up. And then importantly, practice spaciousness. Practice viewing yourself and your body and mind as being both present here and also being spacious beyond the constructs of your own house, your own home. Next month, we will be talking about contemplative practices and practicing a few different types of meditations and really thinking about what is the research behind some of those and what are some practices that we all use. So I do invite all of you to please come to that next session as well. And now I do want to be a little bit mindful that I do like to give pauses. So I would like to stop so I can give you all at least 5 minutes before the top of the hour. And so thank you all for coming today. This is being recorded and it will be there. The slides will be there. And again, I invite you to join all the meditations. We do meditations separately as well. So thank you all for joining today.